for students with learning differences or learning disabilities. You could just type that in and see what comes up. A lot of them are going to be smaller private liberal arts schools because they tend to have more flexibility with their curriculum and the class sizes are smaller. But yeah, if you were to just Google that, you would have lists come up. And if you were to cross-reference those lists, you would see a lot of commonalities between the lists. Certain schools that are going to come up over and over again. The one thing you'd want to make sure of is that the list is not like ad-based. So it doesn't look like a list of ads for schools, right? But as long as you type that in, you should be able to find tons of options. And then I also think just word of mouth is a really good way to find out too. So if you have friends or family members who have learning differences, you could ask them if they have recommendations, because word definitely gets around about universities that have good programs. And then obviously I think kids should definitely go and tour the schools. Obviously that's harder since we're in COVID times, but touring the schools, finding who runs the program at the university, interviewing them, and making sure that you feel comfortable.
No, that's so important. And a lot of times students forget that they can go to the admissions office and just say, hey, can I get in contact with the person in charge of this department? Then do student panels. They love that, especially in the smaller schools for that. Now, some parents and guardians may say, well, so what's better, public or private? Right? So, right, because the public schools have these guidelines, but correct me if I'm wrong, but private schools don't have to give a certain level of support for students.
Yeah, so actually the distinguishing factor is not whether or not the school is public or private. The distinguishing factor is whether or not the school is receiving federal funding. So if the school is a private school, but they receive a certain stipend every year from the federal government for teacher training programs, for example, they are getting federal funding, so they have to provide certain federal rights that are the same as the public schools, right? But if they're a private school that receives no federal funding, they do not have to follow the federal laws for kids with disabilities. So that is an important distinguishing factor. However, there are so many great private schools out there that do offer really great programs. And it's hard for me to say, give an overall statement of what is better, public or private, because, again, it really depends on the student and what they're looking for and what they need. So, again, I would strongly recommend that they do some research into the various programs as much as they can. Just ask questions, get out there and find what you're looking for, and then that will kind of guide you in a certain direction.
And I actually do love that answer. I know a lot of people don't like it. They want give me the quick list. You make it black and white, but searching for colleges is a lot like relationships, right? You need to make sure it blends and work together, and there's no one set piece or variable out there. So if I'm looking at a college like Jana University, what do I search? So because we actually, is it Learning Differences Center? Is it learning disability? What should, because there's so many different names out there being used right now.
Yes. So what I usually do is I go to the university homepage, and then there's always a section for academics in their drop-down menu, and then there's always a place where they have their resources listed, and it'll usually say resources or support, something along those lines. But what I tell kids is it should be relatively easy to find. If they're kind of hiding it in their website, and then when you go to open it, there's hardly any information, that's probably not a great sign. But it should be pretty easy to find if you just go into the academic section of their website and you look at where they have their academic resources, you should find it there.
And so that students can get prepared, because a lot of them, I think parents or guardians get surprised that, I don't have to show any documentation beforehand. They need to show documentation after they get admitted and then sign up for the program. So what do they need? Is there a certain year that their assessment should be done? What should they do? Because like you said earlier, getting assessed that you have a learning difference is not inexpensive.
No, it definitely isn't. But if you are hoping to have services when you're in college, you need to make sure you have an evaluation that is done from the age of 16 or older. The reason for that is because your brain just does such a dramatic amount of changes during that time period, during your adolescent years. And so at the age of 16, the psychologists who do the testing, they use different test batteries that are made for a more quote-unquote adult brain. And so basically anything, once you get to be 17 or 18 years old, any testing you had from before then, like 14 years old, 10 years old, all of that is considered invalid. So you need to get an assessment from 16 or older. So I have a lot of students who will come to me as a freshman, and the parents will say, you know, he hasn't been evaluated since he was 10. Should we have this redone now? It's been 4 years. And I will tell them just to wait a couple of years unless they really want to get them tested twice, if they have the money for that. But other than that, I'll just have them wait 2 years so that they're ready with that assessment for college and beyond.
And there's a lot of talk about learning differences in education, but that brain keeps on developing and changing even after you graduate from college, right? Like till about 25. And, but there's no real conversation. How should someone reevaluate themselves? I know just being around the block for so many years, I've seen some adults struggle because that guidance is disappear. So what is some tips that you have as one leaves the college world into the adult world of how to reassess of, okay, these are now my weaknesses. These are my strengths. This is what I should focus on, and this is what I don't need to focus on anymore.
Right. So the interesting thing is once you leave college and you're ready to find a job, you are still protected under some of those federal laws. So again, knowing what your rights are in the job world is also really important. So for example, let's say you can't be discriminated against, first of all. So if you're in a job interview and you disclose that you have dyslexia and then you find out later from the employer that that's not something that they quote-unquote want, that would be illegal. They can't discriminate or not provide you with a job because of a disability. And if let's say you get the job and you're so excited, but you go into work and you realize that, you knew ahead of time, but you're kind of starting to see how much is required in terms of writing and sending polished emails, and you're just nervous because your dyslexia causes you to make tons of spelling errors, right? The job would have to help you figure out a solution to that. So it could be installing some sort of software on your computer that proofreads. I've seen other adults use software that they can speak into, and then the computer types the emails, or they can assign a colleague to help proofread important messages before they go out. So again, those rights continue into the working world. And I don't want anyone to think that they're limited on what jobs they want because of their learning difference. But they can do it. They just have to be ready to advocate for themselves and ask for what it is that they need. And they can get reevaluated after college too. If they want to do another assessment to see kind of where their brain is at, there are tons of psychologists out there who test adults.
Oh, I know. And now it's a lot, I think, some people are doing it online. I mean, whether it's, right? Yeah, it's just like you were talking about earlier. And I really appreciate that you mentioned that because even as maybe how small your learning difference is, right? Like just saying hold off, I'm a visual learner. I need to see this. Right. You don't hear, you're starting to hear people at the workplace. And also because I do have an adult son, it helped where he had a resume full of experiences. And then when he got his first real serious job outside of high school, he let his employer know. He chose to know. And guess what? They have an incentive program, with the government.
Wonderful.
They signed up and it became more of a cooperation of understanding and stuff like that. So, and because he walked in there understanding his rights, you can't discriminate against me, right? And that's why I was telling people no politics, whether you like it or not, because they're so important.
Yes.
Now, we began this podcast talking about, self-advocacy, taking care of yourself, owning all of who you are and loving yourself, all of it. Any last words of wisdom for whether it's a parent, a guardian, a sibling, that wonderful student, that they need to kind of remind themselves as they're going through this journey in life?
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that your child, your sister, your brother, they are not their disability. Their disability is just a part of who they are. I think a lot of times people tend to see that piece of them as being magnified or the biggest part of them or who they are because they worry, right? But making sure that you are talking to them about other things and making other things important. People tend to get hyper-focused on school when kids have a learning disability. So just making sure that you are coming into contact with all the parts of the person that you love, right? So if they're an athlete, talking to them about their athletics. If they're an artist, talking to them about their art. If they are a social butterfly, talking to them about the friends that they've made, just so that you are honoring all parts of your wonderful family member.
Amen to that. Yes, you are more than just one thing. John, I am so lucky and privileged to have the opportunity not only for this podcast, but to be working with you because
thank you.
Because I know all our students are really in good hands, and hopefully this will help other students and families out there as well. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
SI Counseling Podcast, where we help our students grow into men and women committed to faith and justice, leadership and service, academic excellence, and compassion. You can follow us on social media at SI Counseling on Twitter. And today on our podcast, we're here to give you more information to help you throughout your high school and beyond into college.